Want to welcome everybody to this session of a Housing Ready Showcase for our Strong Towns members and for a broader audience of folks that want to know how do we make progress in our communities and crucially begin to develop more of the housing supply that we need that is affordable to people at incomes that they can manage in ways that are going to help build and strengthen the fabric of our communities. In this context, my name is Norm. I'm the Director of Movement Building for Strong Towns. Really excited to welcome you and to welcome our full slate of guests that we've got here today for this member-exclusive session. We have Bernice Radel in Buffalo, New York, Claire Pearson in Jackson, Tennessee, Jamie Pesch, who's joining us from Muskegon, Michigan, Tim Corcoran from South Bend, Indiana, Mayor Karen Knutson, who's going to be joining us from Eugene, Oregon, once her first community event wraps up, and then Lisa Lee from Sacramento, California as well. Guiding us through this session about housing policy reform and the shifts that are needed, as well as the fact that, as the six guests are going to be indicating, a lot of this progress is already being made at the ground level. Guiding us through this discussion is Edward Erfurt, our Chief Technical Advisor. He's here to share the big picture behind the Housing Ready Cities project. And then Chris Allen, our Director of Events and Partnerships, will be engaging with each of our guests throughout the session. Plus, we're going to keep the conversation going. So if you would like to be able to ask your questions, drop them into the chat during the live session here. That's one of the perks of being a member, is you're participating in it in this way. But you can also, if we don't get to your question today, or if you're dropping the questions in the comments on the YouTube channel afterwards, next Wednesday at noon Central Time, we're hosting another round of Ask Strong Towns Anything, which is a member exclusive session to dig deeper into questions. And in particular, we'll take up questions from this webcast together. So if we don't catch all of your questions today, we will definitely take them up on Wednesday as well. And then looking ahead, mark your calendars for June 10th. If you're not planning to be at the Strong Towns National Gathering because you can't make it out to Providence for one reason or another, do join us on it for a live webcast. We're going to be streaming our keynote presentation by Chris Arnott, who's going to be presenting on what it is to the lessons he's learned about building communities by walking through so many places. And then it'll be in conversation with Chuck Marone as well. And just one last thing before we hand over things to my friend Chris is members make all of this possible. The Housing Ready Toolkit, we've continued to receive great feedback on this, and head over to strongtowns.org/housing ready to download your copy of the toolkit. But members are the ones that have made this possible, and so we're grateful for your support. And if anyone is watching this and not yet sure if you're a member, if you've made a contribution to Strong Towns in the past year, that means you're a member. If not, it's really easy to go and do that. Head to strongtowns.org/membership. Now, somebody that is helping to build out our whole network of partners and the networks that we're establishing across our communities is Chris Allen. And I'm going to throw it over to Chris for this next session here, or next section here.
Thank you, Norm, for the great introduction, and thank all of you for joining us here today. It is a privilege to get to be here with all of you. So the goal today is to talk about all of the great work that is happening in these cities that we're going to have profiled. Norm introduced some of the heroes that we're going to be speaking with. But really quickly, to help everybody get up to speed, I want to run through kind of the big policy themes that we're talking about in this toolkit that we're going to be unpacking here today with our experts. And the first one is to allow single-family home conversion to duplex or triplex by right. We think that there are neighborhoods full of folks all over the country and the continent who would like to be able to rent out that room, that extra room, that bedroom, that basement to somebody to allow the housing choice options they need and to support their ability to stay in that home. Our next policy position is that you should be able to permit backyard cottages in all residential zones. We're going to talk about some of the unique options there. We think you should be able to legalize starter homes in all residential zones. I think all of us on this call are probably familiar with lot minimums or square foot minimums in our communities and the restrictive process that has on housing starts and housing availability. Our policy number 4 is to eliminate minimum lot size requirements in existing neighborhoods. This has the exact same effect as square foot requirements, requiring developers to only build one kind of housing product regardless of market need. If the lot needs $1 million house, the developer's got to put $1 million house on it, or they're going to lose money. So we've got to make sure that we're right sizing lot requirements for market need. Next, repealing all parking mandates for housing. We have a pretty strong stance on this. We think that they need to be removed in all cases, in all instances. For very good reasons. And number 6 is to streamline the approval process. We know that this one can get a lot of people jittery. but we understand that this is necessary to take the next step. So, one of the things and one of the reasons we've got some of our heroes, some of our good friends here with us today is to show that there are real world examples of these things happening. All too often, these housing conversations are left as an academic white paper or this kind of aspirational YouTube video style where it's just like, here's the 17 things you should do tomorrow in your community. And at Strong Towns, we believe that it is paramount to actually be able to go and get the work done in communities. And so we wanted to use our time today with our members and friends and partners to be able to show you that there are heroes in real communities getting this done on the ground today. And so before we hop over there, I want to pass it off to my friend and colleague, Edward Erfurt here at Strong Towns, to talk a little bit about the Housing Ready framework.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And really, I'm excited everybody's here today, especially the presenters, because they're the real leaders in this work that we should all follow and listen to. I want to share an idea out here that is coming out of the Housing Ready Toolkit. If you go to the website, and Norm dropped it in the chat, I'd encourage all of you to take a moment and do the survey. See which of those policies you have adopted in your city. If you've adopted those, we will put you on the map. It's a way to show you that you're not alone in this particular struggle of getting out of our housing crisis. The Housing Ready Toolkit comes out of, and the Housing Ready site comes out of the work out of Escaping the Housing Trap. At the end of the book, Daniel and Chuck shared 3 strategy areas where every city at the most local level could start to begin to address their housing crisis. Looking at code reform, which is our first toolkit. Secondly, looking at how to grow an ecosystem of incremental developers. And third, localizing finance. All of these come out of a basic premise that our housing crisis is not a numbers problem, it is a systems and strategy problem. And being a systems and strategy problem, we believe that every city at the most local level have the power to heal their housing market. I am working collectively now with listening and meeting with many, many incremental developers, and I'm also meeting with municipal staff on the backside of the counter. We're hosting focus groups to ask questions, to figure out what works and doesn't work. The first toolkit are 6 code reforms that we've heard from both incremental developers that this is a hindrance to the work they're doing, and also from local governments identifying that these are arbitrary things in the way of getting the type of development their policies have set forward. I'd encourage you to take a look at that. I'd encourage you to listen to these stories. And if you know somebody, or you're doing a development project, or you're at City Hall working on the housing crisis, and you want to share your thoughts, feel free to email me at edward@strongtowns.org. I'd love to invite you to one of our focus groups. I'd love to get your input of how we can improve our housing toolkit and add to that. I definitely will be next week at the Ask Strong Towns Anything, which is another great opportunity for you to deep dive the struggles that you have to address your housing crisis. So, Chris, I will give it back to you to introduce our great guest today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ed. And again, thank you all for being here with us. We are going to start off with one of our best friends, Bernice Radel, over in Buffalo, New York. Bernice is a developer extraordinaire in Buffalo. She's also the co-founder and president of Neighborhood Evolution. And she is going to talk with us about her work and the great work that is happening in the city of Buffalo to allow single-family home conversion to duplex or triplex by right. She's going to tell us about their experiences, some of the challenge, some of their victories. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Bernice.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thanks for having me, Chris, and everybody at Strong Towns. You know, I love y'all and I love to talk about Buffalo. So here I go. Buffalo, New York. If you guys don't know, Buffalo is a snowy city. It's a dense city. It's a place like we had 600,000 people and we've declined to about 285,000. So that's really important to know. In the 1960s, we adopted what was called the Elvis Code. That's what we called it because Elvis was alive then, which basically made all of our very beautiful, historic, walkable neighborhoods completely illegal. And so for a lot of people that follow Strong Towns, you may know this, but we worked very hard on the Buffalo Green Code, basically legalizing our entire city, legalizing all the lots, all the buildings, all the historic fabric, everything. And one of the things that Chris wanted me to talk about is allowing duplexes and triplexes by right. Now, our Green Code covers a lot more than that. You know, we remove minimum parking requirements. We allow old legacy shop fronts to be re-legalized. But the focus today is allowing, we basically have one single family zone in one teeny tiny part of our city. Everything is allowed by right, except that little teeny town. You could do a duplex, you could do a triplex, you could do a carriage house, all by right in the city. And I think it's important to say, like, a lot of places say, well, we can't do this. But if Buffalo can do it, where we literally get 2, 3, 4 feet of snow, and we can allow density to happen, we can remove minimum parking requirements citywide. If we can do that, and we don't have alleys, by the way, we don't have any alleys. So if we can do that, then you can definitely do it. Okay, just listen to me say it. I swear, if we can do it, you can do it. So I think the key thing is we allow duplexes by right. We allow triplex. You can build a carriage house to do a triplex. And then the key piece in our code actually is we don't really have a density requirement. We don't have a minimum or maximum density, but we do have a rule that says on a per unit basis, 1,250 square feet has to be allowed per unit, but that's based on the lot square footage. So what's really great about that is if you have like a 30 by 99 lot, you can fit 3 or 4 units on the lot, depending on how big the units are. And that's very important for us because we've been allowed to increase the density across our city.
We get brought into a lot of these conversations where people will reach out and be like, hey, how could we even do this? That seems so daunting. That's so hard. We get kind of the standard, responses of, oh, this person said it ruined the character of our neighborhood, or, oh, this person said I'd be driven out of town. How did you guys deal with the kind of natural pushback that happens as soon as you guys brought forward this, what I'm going to very kindly refer to as, kind of a crazy idea at the time?
It was crazy. I think places like Buffalo, Detroit, Cleveland, a lot of these places have an advantage, which is we're still sort of desperate for development. And so when we said we're going to remove minimum parking requirements, it was no matter what political spectrum you were on, it didn't matter. We were reducing the cost of development, so Republicans or conservatives loved that. And then for the left side of the politics, it was like we were saying, okay, now we can also add housing, affordable housing. We could add density. We can support transit. And it made sense across the board. And I think it's really just about saying what needs to be said to the right people to get them on board. Now, we, like many of our historic cities, are very used to density. We're used to, like, in between my house. I live in a townhouse. I don't have any space in between my neighbors, but most houses in Buffalo are like 3 to 4 feet wide, right in between. So we're sort of used to it. And so the other conversation that we had a lot was, why not make this legal again? Why are we gonna, we already have carriage houses, we have duplexes. Why would we make them illegal? Why would we hurt them? And I think that was a really important part of the conversation. And then I will also say one of the things that was really important to passing this was we had to get everybody involved. So I have buttons, not with me actually. Usually I have when we're floating around. But I had to make buttons. We had to pack the meetings. Don't be afraid to get all your friends to show up to a meeting. And when you're going to be talking about parking, removing parking, or allowing density, get your people there, because common council people, to be honest, they don't really know all the time. And it's not that they're lazy, but if they see a whole room saying, yes, remove minimum parking requirements, then and everybody claps and hoots and hollers, because that's what we did in Buffalo. Then they're like, okay, check. And one last thing that we have to worry about, So I just get involved, talk on all political spectrums, which this is appropriate for, and really don't give up the fight. And by the way, it took us 6 years to get that done. 6 years, that was a long time. It was more of a political decision, like a mayoral election plus common council election. It wasn't necessarily about zoning. But it was 6 years of a lot of work.
I think that's really easy to lose sight of sometimes in these conversations, is that even in a place that, because of hardship, had the right kind of environment for this, had at least the ability to have the conversation, and then have some real heroes and champions like yourself, Bernice, it still can take 6 years to get something like this done, right?
Yeah.
We joke a lot of times that, the suburban pattern of development has an 80-year head start on us. And so a lot of this stuff we're not just going to be able to do with, one really good Facebook post or one really
Right.
good email campaign. Even in a situation or context like Buffalo, which had some great champions like yourself, it can take 6 years to get this work done. But you did, talking about what it took to give cover and to have the political will to get this done. I think that's the thing we see happen a lot too is that it's not even necessarily always that the elected leaders are averse to these ideas. And in some cases they might be, but oftentimes they're not. They've only heard the other side. They've so
Yes.
often only ever heard anyone say the other perspective. And so being willing to stand up and say, no, actually, we do want these things. We are here for these things. We want these things in our community allows that new conversation to start where maybe it didn't even happen before. Yeah, great point, Carly. It always seems easy after it's done. And you my dad always jokingly said, he was an old timey pastor. He would always joke that you don't ever get to tell the story of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat in the middle. Is that the story always looks so different when you're in different points, and you don't ever get to tell it till the end. And I think all too often with these stories of transformation and change in our community, we're just stuck in the middle, and we need to wait to tell the story till we get all the way to the end.
Yeah, we need to see it through. And and there's always some great lights. You meet these great people. I have some of my best friends. We worked on the Green Code together. We talk every single day. I met my husband at a Green Code meeting. So it's like, when I think back on it, you just don't know where it's going to land, but you do have to really see it through. And the Green Code has so many things that we put in there, including like the legacy shops that I talk a lot about, which are the minimum parking, but just, it was really hard, but just seeing it through was really important. And I will tell you, we have seen a ton of development now renovate. We had all these vacant duplexes and vacant triplexes because they were illegal, and they'd have to go to zoning board approval, and the zoning board may not approve it. Right now, we're seeing all of these be renovated because they don't require parking. We don't need to have parking lots, and because they're legal. And so that's what's been so great. And actually, I served on the zoning board for 9 years, and we joked around because it used to be difficult before the Green Code. It was chaos, but then it got so good that I joked around that we were the fence and parking pad review board, because the only thing that would come to us after the code was changed was fences and parking pads, because everything else was sort of solved. And now all of a sudden everybody's, you think from a city perspective, your headaches went down just because now it's clear. And anyway, I could talk forever. I'm sorry, but yeah, I'm happy to. But come to everyone that's on this call. You anybody can come to Buffalo, and I'll take you kayaking, and we'll talk about density and zoning all day long.
Guys, I can confirm she is telling you the truth. Bernice, I want to thank you very much, not only for telling us about single family home conversion to duplex or triplex by right in Buffalo, but that through good urban advocacy, you yourself can also find a spouse. So we're learning all kinds of things here on the call today. Bernice, again, thank you. We're going to go over to Claire now. Claire Pearson is the Community Development Coordinator in the Mayor's Office in Jackson, Tennessee. And she has been a great supporter of backyard cottages and granny flats there in Jackson. And one of my favorite anecdotes about Claire is that she actually herself lives in one of these units. And so, Claire, please hop on and tell us about the experience of getting this done in your city and some of the challenges that you faced and how you overcame some of that challenges and how implementation has been for you all moving forward. I'll hand it over to Claire.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you, everybody, for having me and being willing to listen about these changes. As Chris said, I am a huge advocate of backyard cottages, or ADUs, as we usually call them in Jackson. I've lived in one for years now. Mine's a detached garage apartment. It's about 812 square feet, and I love it. So how it kind of happened in Jackson is we've always had an accessory dwelling unit code in there, but it was usually for what you typically hear of a mother-in-law suite that's attached to the home. So in 2023, we went to amend that to be detached. This came after a housing study that was done in Jackson. We are preparing still for a large amount of growth in our city. And on top of that, just the housing crisis that we're all seeing. And so after that study, we knew we needed to make some changes, and accessory dwelling units was one of those first easier changes that we could make. So in 2023, we amended it so they could be detached, and so they would allow non-family members to live in those. that change was very easy. It went through our planning commission and our city council pretty seamlessly, but implementation has been, I think, where our issues lie of getting that news out there and showing people, educating them on accessory dwelling units. So something we've done on that front, we actually just received a grant for an ADU design competition is what we're calling it. So we're having local state colleges put in their ideas for accessory dwelling unit plans, and then those plans will be available for free for anybody in the city to use. This one will have a special interest in and focus on accessible units. So perhaps with aging communities, if they want to downsize, they can move into this detached garage, detached cottage, whatever, and then rent out their larger house and help with income. But we've seen the ADU to be an easy first step in some of these bigger housing changes that we can make.
That's great, Claire. Thank you so much. What were some of the, or I guess I would say, was there any broad community pushback when you guys were starting to have those conversations about, kind of detached versus attached? And then did the study play into any of that conversation?
There wasn't a lot. Most of it was what are you talking about? What is it? What do you mean by that? There was some, obviously, as far as streetscape look. How will we make sure this isn't messing up how our neighborhoods look? We don't look the same. So there's provisions for that, like no front entries, that it needs to be side or back entries for our ADUs. So it's really been the education part for us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I live in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and we were, everybody says they were first or second or 14th. I'm not exactly sure where we were. Fayetteville had ADUs by right pretty early, and the proposition the city council brought forward is that we'll make it provisional, we'll give it a time limit, and if there's been any problems, we'll roll it back. And when we got to the end of that provision, which I think might have been 2 years, the city said, "This is, we have gotten some feedback, and the change we're going to make is that we're going to do 2 ADUs by right instead of 1 because there's been absolutely no problems. And there was no street parking problems, there was no neighborhood character, and in fact, one of the presentations that one of the members of the planning commission gave was you couldn't even see a single one of them from the street. They took a picture of every single one that had been licensed, and you couldn't even see a single one of them from the street. And so ADUs, backyard cottages, we try and call them backyard cottages, granny flats, to humanize them and that experience. But we do understand that in technical language, a lot of times, you guys who are getting stuff done are going to need to refer to them as ADUs. It's one of these conversations where people are sometimes so scared of stuff they don't know. And as soon as we can remove those barriers, it also helps remove any of the arguments. And I think now we've got enough momentum on detached that it's a lot harder to have some of those arguments than it might have been in the past. So yeah. Claire, we'll look for updates from you in the future about how yours is doing and about what life is like there. Again, Claire, thank you so much. We're going to head over to Elisa now. She is our LC leader in Sacramento, California. Elisa Lee is a local conversation leader, and she is a longtime grassroots organizer and frequent Strong Towns contributor. And I, earlier this year, had the privilege of getting to meet her at an event in California, which was definitely an honor. So, Elisa, we're going to hand it over to you to hear about how we are legalizing starting homes in all residential zones in Sacramento.
Yes, so I'm going to speak a lot in relation to this about Sacramento's missing middle housing ordinance, which passed in September of last year, because that's really where the lion's share of the work on this issue has been done. So Sacramento already didn't have a minimum dwelling size in our zoning code, which was an excellent way to get us started on making sure starter homes could be more easily built and more easily accessible. But there's been really a sea change in what's been made possible in the last few years with the passage of 2 documents, the 2040 General Plan, which was adopted last spring, and then that missing middle housing ordinance from last fall. And with the combination of these 2 documents, many things became possible in concert at the same time that have really enabled a huge amount of missing middle housing to be built and built from the ground up. So by both ending parking minimums through their 2040 General Plan and also basically allowing multi-unit housing in every single neighborhood by right across the entire city, which was achieved through the Missing Middle Housing Ordinance. That's been absolutely momentous, not just for Sacramento as a city, but pretty much the first in the nation to do so. So like many cities, Sacramento, about 70% of it is zoned for single family residential only. So while that is still the case, we have now changed what we consider possible within single family residential. So multi-unit housing, cottage courts, 4 to 10 unit housing is possible in all of those single family residential zones, which is humongous. From the very house I'm sitting in, we live on a 6,000 square foot lot. I could build 12 units here and not provide any parking. Those two things happening in concert have been humongous. So that also allows the city to skip, the city council and the public hearing process for a lot of those different kinds of housing types, which is huge. I also want to uplift that, the ordinance also basically cut in half the minimum lot width citywide. So residential lots can be as small as 1,200 square feet, which really encourages some different kinds of innovative starter home products that we probably haven't even thought of yet. We reduced a lot of the front and side setback requirements citywide. And really, really significantly, we replaced the limitation on density with, instead of saying you're limited by the number of units you build, we're saying you're limited by a floor area ratio, which sort of helps determine how the building will look in relation to the lot that it's on, but that doesn't dictate how many units you can have, which is far less restrictive. And a majority of the projects can now be approved at the staff level. And this is a great chance to bring in the staff who are not here and couldn't make it, but really wanted to come. Matt Hartel as the assistant director of the community development department, and Wen, who is amazing, spoke at a Strong Sacktown meeting. Actually, both of them did, when we were still a little small group meeting, just about a dozen people. And I really want to highlight both of them. They're both very wonderful individuals who care very deeply about this. And for both of them, especially, Wen's work on the Missing Middle Housing Ordinance, they were very focused on going neighborhood to neighborhood. He really worked on making sure that they thought about which communities would benefit most from this and talking to them directly. And seeing kind of that people were ready to have this conversation because affordability was such a challenge neighborhood by neighborhood. But, that wasn't without challenge. He's spoken about how there was a lot of pushback and a lot of fear and a lot of concern that this would radically change their neighborhoods by allowing this kind of thing. And it took a lot of dedicated listening, open encouragement of those questions, and really sitting with people's tensions. And he's talked a lot that by actually really listening and sitting down and addressing their concerns, made getting past those barriers a lot easier. And when it did get passed, it was passed with a lot of community support across many, many different types of advocates calling for affordable housing, Strong Sacktown included. And I just really want to highlight that these planning efforts preceded our group. They started in 2021, developing this really ambitious general plan and housing ordinance. And the last thing that I think is so great to call out here is that they also thought of anti-displacement provisions. So they will not accept applications for missing middle housing that would replace units that had a tenant with an active lease within the past year, and you could not build fewer units than what already existed. So there's a lot of intention going on in how they thought about this, and a lot that came from the community input. So I'll drop a few resources in the chat, but I really wish they could be here to tell you themselves, because they put in an enormous amount of effort and a lot of community engagement, and that is a big part of how our group really got to bolster our activity through a lot of the workshops they provided.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Elisa. If I ever can't be at a meeting, I'll make sure to send you to talk about the great work I've done. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I think you did highlight another point there, just like Bernice did, is that how long this took to get done, right? This wasn't an overnight change. Talk a little bit about, if you could, Elisa, any of the has there been any pushback or any feedback since this has been established? Have there been any attempts to kind of end run the current legislation that is on the books for your city? And how if that has existed, you all were able to counter that?
Surprisingly, I think the issue of affordability has become so visible that there hasn't been a lot of pushback that was coming through the main channels. Probably the biggest challenge was that we, in the interim missing middle housing ordinance that passed, we wanted to remove some of the bulk control requirements that basically would, because they are those requirements are in there, triple decker housing is not really allowed because it would cut so much into that third floor that it would be financially prohibitive for most bottom up small developers. So that bulk control requirement did get a lot of support from a lot of people who didn't want to see towering flat roofs on these potential triple decker buildings. But that is something that can change. And I do also want to uplift that the city staff thought of it as an interim ordinance that is going to be revisited a year from when it passed, because they want to see how it's working and to continue to refine it with data and results. And so far, most of the development applications that have been submitted have indeed been for missing middle housing types like ADUs and duplexes or development on vacant infill lots. So I feel, like a lot of hope and, cautious, but steady confidence that I think the results will speak. And there seems to be a lot of community support. But I think, as always, the challenges are really showing that this isn't going to threaten people's existing, ability to stay. And that gets into a different conversation around affordability for sure.
Absolutely. And that's one of the tensions that we always have in these conversations about, like, what do we do in my city? What should we do here is that, we've got what we think, we've expressed here in the toolkit, and we're hearing from some great folks in cities across the country today is, we have a pretty good handle on what we think best practices are. And then when every city goes to do it, there's a little bit of tone and nuance and context that you need to be very, very thoughtful of. A community that is done a lot of land banking work and is trying to redeploy a lot of fallow assets in the community through a land bank or a trust, and then get those redeployed, is going to have a completely different problem set than a community where rents are immediately too high and pricing people out. Yes, you can have a barbell in your community as well, but everybody's community is a little bit different. So, Elise, I want to thank you again. And now we're going to transition to Jamie Pesh in Muskegon, Michigan. Jamie is a planner for the city of Muskegon, a lifelong resident and brother of Strongtown's most famous stand-up comedian, Evan Pesh. So, Jamie, I'm going to hand it over to you, buddy, and let you talk to us about the best stuff you guys have going on over there in Muskegon with eliminating minimum lot sizes.
All right. Yeah, he may be the most famous stand-up comedian, but he's probably not the funniest one. So I'm hearing a lot of parallels already with Muskegon. Muskegon, in this case, we had our peak population in 1950, as with many cities, and we're now about 80% under our peak population. But more alarming is that through annexation and probably a little bit of industrial fill in our lake, we now have a population density that's about 55% of what it was at its peak. We've weathered some pretty tough economic times here in Michigan, and Muskegon definitely, with a lot of industrial jobs leaving the area. So what we ended up with was a housing stock that didn't weather those all that well. And we ended up with a lot of vacant lots, whether that's through house demolitions, fires, you name it. There was just a lot of vacant land at certain points in time. A lot of that falls into the city's hands. We have a county land bank now, but the city still has the lion's share of lots. And what we had done for years, because of zoning requirements, is just sold them off for a minimum amount of money, like $1 per lot kind of thing, just to get them, quote, back on the tax rolls, but didn't really gain much from vacant land, obviously. And we started looking, when we adopted in 2015 a form-based code in our downtown and some of the smaller sections in our core residential neighborhoods, at our minimum lot size requirements. And that was really the thing that was holding us back at least initially. And we realized that a lot of these lots we're selling are perfectly viable, perfectly able to have houses on them, sized similarly to neighboring houses that still existed, and just asked the simple question of why do we have these requirements in place already? We started talking about expanding our form-based code, but that got a little too much into the deep end, I think, for our residents. And we scaled it back initially to talk just about minimum lot sizes. We had a 50-foot minimum width requirement and a 6,000 square foot minimum area requirement, which is small in some parts of the country, but here it was quite large. And when we started comparing that to the reality that was in our neighborhoods, we realized that it wasn't even remotely resembling what was actually built out there in a lot of our neighborhoods, our established neighborhoods especially. It was making things difficult for people that lived in houses not on vacant lots. Having a legally buildable lot would simplify refinancing for them. It would ease the access to their home's equity, and it would more easily permit building additions, things that we kept hearing from residents that they were running into. We had vision plans and community goals that were all going to be very difficult to implement unless we did something about our zoning regulations. And we also heard from the community a lot of desires for neighborhood serving commercial uses, things like that, that we just simply didn't have the population density to support. And it was a tough thing to explain because people were pretty used to sizable yards. That was sort of the standard, the expectation that everybody thought was useful. All of those lots that we were selling in the decades prior were making people's yards extra large, and that was sort of seen as a benefit overall. But what we saw internally was that it was slowly withering our tax base, and we had so much infrastructure to maintain there that we just couldn't do it. We started drilling down into where these vacant lots were, and what we found was kind of startling that 80% of our vacant lots existed in only 5 of our 15 neighborhoods. It was only 33% of our land area. And so we're looking at 5 core neighborhoods and one that was actually part of an urban renewal project. That was where the lion's share of our lots were. And we started looking into just simply creating 2 new zoning districts. And the goal would be to simply accommodate smaller lot sizes. And we ended up going through the entire city and classifying all of those zones by block. And we didn't change anything about the uses. That was comfortable for everybody. And we also, at the same time, eliminated what was a maximum density limitation, one of the other things that was holding us back. And the big takeaway that we had was that we just can't let incompatible zoning regulations hold back century-old housing stock in some cases. Those houses are already up against enough, and just another thing to have to jump through a hoop on it's too much for a lot of people. We saw the strengths in building on the inherent strengths of our traditional neighborhoods, like the layouts and the way everything was structured. Not lining up with the zoning was harming everything, and one was right, and frankly, one was just not the correct approach for this city particularly. We made that change. We introduced 2 zoning districts. We reduced one of them to 30-foot wide lots and 3,000 square feet minimum lot areas. We didn't eliminate everything entirely because that wasn't comfortable for our commission and for the people that were involved in the engagement that we did. And we created a second zone that allowed for 40-foot lots and 4,000 square foot minimum. And then we kept the original one in some of the areas that had larger platted areas. That change overnight, once it was approved, we had 56% of our vacant lots were non-buildable, and we bumped that number up to 84% just with those changes alone. That was a huge benefit. Suddenly, not only did we have a ton of buildable vacant lots, we were able to split existing vacant lots that were large enough to split. That increased the number of potential units that we could address. We didn't really have a housing crisis at the time, but we are proud to think that we were just a little bit ahead of the curve there, trying to address some of these things just by bringing existing housing into compliance and getting some of those lots built on again. And a few years later, we're really glad that we did that first. This all happened concurrently with some of the other things that have been discussed, reducing our minimum setbacks and changing our minimum housing unit sizes, things like that, that also sort of eased things up on people looking to build on smaller lots. And in 2023, we did a housing needs assessment that actually showed a 3,000 unit deficit, and that was at all price points. And this really set us up well for not only hoping to meet that, we actually got well into the numbers and found out that even if we built on the smallest lots that we could build on, we still weren't going to meet that deficit. But what it did do is it sort of paved the way for our zoning reform efforts that open things up to more than just single family detached housing in all of our city. We're happy to get that passed just late last year. And we're well on our way to getting some of those units built now. We've had a ton of interest, as you guys have covered before.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jamie. And in the interest of time, we'll come back to Jamie for questions. In the interest of time, Mayor, if I could give you just a couple minutes before I know you've got to run. I want to really quickly introduce Mayor Knudsen from Eugene, Oregon, who's an architect, writer, and educator with more than 25 years of experience. And she's worked to support the creation of Eugene's Affordable Housing Trust Fund, Lake County's first affordable housing action plan, and Oregon's landmark missing middle housing reforms. And Mayor, thank you so much. We know you've got to run really quick, but we did want to give you a little bit of time before you've got to go to talk about repealing parking mandates for housing in your community.
Sure, and thank you so much, Chris and Carlene and everyone at Strong Towns for organizing today. I'm Mayor Karen Knudsen from the city of Eugene. For those of you who are not familiar with Eugene, Oregon, we are about 180,000 population within our city. We are the home of the Oregon Ducks. We're at the southern end and the upriver end of the beautiful Willamette Valley. And we're also within that population, it's about a 340,000 person metro area that we are the population center of. So second largest city within the state of Oregon, and a partner and a sibling in ways to innovation that is certainly part of what makes the Willamette Valley an identifiable place across the country, and a partner with Portland in so many different ways in that work. I will say that our efforts at our city and the elimination of mandatory parking requirements, this just went into effect in 2024, but came out of work at the governor's office. Previous governor of Oregon, Kate Brown, established a program called the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities program. And through that program's instigation, required cities to do more work looking at things like the relationship between housing production and also our transportation and utilization of urban land. City of Eugene, interesting case study in that because of the time that we grew up mid-century and really grew up and out, following mid-century patterns and an assumption about everyone driving everywhere in a single passenger vehicle all the time, we have an enormous opportunity to retrofit our community, and eliminating the mandatory requirement of parking with new development, both in our downtown center, where parking had not been required for a few years, but now citywide with all increments and scales of development. Really critical part of us walking into this future and being able to meet our community's needs. I will say to you all, you certainly know this intuitively, but I can also say to you on the ground that given the typical lot sizes within Eugene, given the pattern of development that we are seeking to retrofit, the elimination of parking off-street parking requirements and the allocation of site to meet parking development standards, removing that has really allowed for us to do a couple of things effectively. One, we've made it easier for people to take advantage of the very innovative housing reforms that we have customized and curated locally as a part of Oregon's statewide city efforts, and Eugene's middle housing code. Our implementation of that law locally really prioritize small housing for climate action, because we have a climate recovery ordinance adopted in our community, very forward thinking in terms of putting that into local law, and also prioritized incentivized the development of affordable housing. So essentially, with our middle housing code, incentivized small houses and affordable housing. Very important, because that's an expression of our community's values. And removing mandatory parking development geometrically makes a lot of that more possible, more feasible. We have a lot of neighborhoods that are essentially mid-century matchbox single-story housing units that run from setback to setback across the entire site with a very large backyard, but geometrically infeasible to maintain that existing unit of housing and deliver new, two new units of off-street parking, 3 new units of off-street parking, 6 new units of off-street parking, really in conflict with what we were trying to do, which was implement housing policy that would support infill development and incremental change over time in a whole delightful variety of diversities across all of our city, but not do that in a way that was most likely to remove existing housing stock and essentially set existing housing stock in conflict with incremental development and incremental improvements to that neighborhood. And I think we're seeing the benefits. As mayor of our community, I'm very focused on also our downtown. And so the redevelopment of existing surface parking lots in our city center is also a focus of my attention because it's a huge opportunity for us. But for anyone interested in this kind of work and this confluence of housing policy reforms, zoning reform, and also parking reform, we are seeing the benefits because we are seeing projects happen that are great housing outcomes, great and affordable and innovative housing outcomes that would not have been geometrically possible and would not have been financially feasible had parking been required off-street.
That is great. Thank you so much, Mayor. I know you've got to run. Thank you so much for your time. We do greatly appreciate it. And thank you for all the work you're doing in Eugene.
It's wonderful to see you all today, and I will look forward to being back with you again soon.
Absolutely. Us too. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tim Corcoran. He's the Director of Planning and Community Resilience of the city of South Bend, Indiana, an epicenter and example of incremental development in the U.S. So, Tim, let's have you come on and talk about all the great stuff you guys have done there to streamline the process to help get the kind of units you guys want to see in your community deployed.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Strong Towns, for having us and letting me share a little bit about what we've been up to in South Bend. And really, listening to all the speakers today, it's everything that the speakers have said today that really add up to process improvements. And I'm like, thanks for putting me at the end, Chris, where everybody said everything that we've done. But, much like Buffalo, South Bend grew rapidly up until the 1960s. We lost 30,000 people over the next, 60 years. And only have now started to see that trend rebound. So I think one of the important things is that we really take everything that we do in a sort of an incremental approach to everything we do. All right, we one of our biggest sort of wins is our zoning ordinance that won the Driehaus Award for Form-Based Codes in 2021. But we took 2 years, and we did borrow heavily from the Green Code. Thank you, Bernice. But they have a lot of great ideas there. But we really took an incremental approach to changing our zoning ordinance so that no one piece of that puzzle could undermine the whole ordinance. And that's how we got our missing middle ordinance passed, was because we adopted the language, but it didn't even apply anywhere in South Bend. So it was really safe for our council to adopt it. But then through neighborhood planning, we started to rezone neighborhoods. So we were working kind of at both ends of that spectrum, socializing those ideas so that we could start to build them. So we do incremental zoning reform that way, neighborhood by neighborhood. And through all of that work, we touched on a lot of major policy changes, like here's setbacks, ADUs, minimum lot sizes, parking, no parking. Our minimum lot size is now 15 feet in our missing middle zones, and 30 in our more suburban zones. So, and then another big way to help the process in terms of how do we administer our code, but how do people work with our code? That we want everybody to work with it. So we really spend a lot of time simplifying our code, making it easier for people to understand, moving it away from sort of the lawyer or land use professional who is the only person who could understand it, to just regular folks to be able to understand it. And I think that's been a really big help of helping to expand our small scale developer community. Over the years, we've had groups like Neighborhood Evolution that Bernice is with, or Incremental Development Alliance, to come and help us grow our small scale developer community. So we're kind of doing all of these things in concert as a way to really be, laser focused on delivering more housing for South Bend. But with each level, each thing that you do, you always start, and if you're engaging with your small scale developer community, you're going to find like where the next problem lies, and so how do you tackle that next problem? And for us, we have a lot of older and aging infrastructure. Some of that infrastructure, like some of our sewer lines, can be upwards of 20 feet below the street. A plumber cannot connect those vacant lots back to a sewer line that deep. You need an excavation crew. It costs a lot of money to do that. So the next thing we looked at was a sewer lateral connection policy that allowed developers to help infill these neighborhoods that have seen so much damage and disinvestment over the years, and really to try to make it competitive with greenfield development as well, and try to make those costs similar. And then, like probably a lot of communities that are here on this call, there's so many well-meaning people in your community who want to get things done and want to try to build new and to heal their neighborhoods. But we often talk the same language. We also often say the same things, but when you put those words to paper, they don't always kind of compute. And so we wanted to start to raise the level of design that and help people with that. And so that was the genesis of our pre-approved housing program. And we started with 5 houses. We now have 9 in our catalog. But it was really to try to help elevate the level of design in these neighborhoods, to also reduce the sort of NIMBYism that can go with new construction, even in places where we all know new construction needs to happen. We've taken our pre-approved housing plan program to a point where when a new developer has come to us and said, hey, we want to do townhouses in these neighborhoods, we said, okay, we'll design them for you, and we will pre-approve them, put them in our catalog, and you will use those designs. And that way it has been both a partnership that with the city, the developer, and bringing neighborhoods along in that process to help smooth that process along. So I really think when you think about process improvements, and I should also mention that our pre-approved house plans can be approved in 20 minutes by our building department, which is maybe a record, I don't know. But is all of these things, because we are so laser focused on delivering new housing, we know that the thing that we need the most to make South Bend a stronger, more resilient place is we need more people. And we want to welcome those people back to South Bend and make it as easy as possible for those people to live and work here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. And thank you to all our presenters. I know a few of them had to leave, but again, want to thank Bernice, Claire, and Alyssa, and Jamie, and Mayor, and Tim. Norm, I'm going to hand it over to you. We have gotten so much great content out of here. We've got just a few minutes left for Q&A. So I wanted to hand that off to you to surface some of the great questions and conversations we had from the group here. So take it away, Norm.
Yeah, awesome. I picked up a question from Scott Lowe, and I think this is something that maybe Edward, I'll call on you first, and then we can throw it over to a couple of our guests. But the question on, is Sacramento maybe a better model for some of the places that are experiencing slightly healthier economic conditions or are more robust sort of local economy? There's an embedded sort of assumption here that I would love to unpick here. But Edward, why don't you pick up this question first?
Yeah, we can see the results faster in a community that has faster growth. That's the only difference. But I will tell you the amount of work, and if you follow Bernice on any of her Instagrams or you see any of this stuff on Neighbor Evolution, there is a lot of work occurring in Buffalo. When we see these things, housing-ready cities are places that housing is occurring because our policies align with our implementation and actions on the ground. Mm-hmm. So it does not matter the size of the city. It doesn't matter the scale of growth. All of our cities need housing. All of our cities have a demand for housing, and just some will see the results faster than others.
Yeah. And Bernice had picked up on the fact that, there may be a nominal benefit in having a $1 house available, in some of the schemes that are available for investors to come in from out of town, particularly, and make something happen. But the reality is you also are trying to buy lumber and buy all of the plaster and all of the things you need based on the equity of a $1 home, at least as at the time when it's valued. And so in places that have slightly higher land prices, you actually can borrow against, or sort of there's already value stored in that lot in comparison with a lot where that's less the case. Maybe Tim, I'll call on you as well, because I think that this is one of those things where people say, so, you could, people can do it elsewhere. And you've shown like, no, like we've made our place somewhere by actually going ahead and doing this. And I think developing a model that a lot more places can do. Do you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, the housing crisis is the challenge of our time, right? And for me, and for places like South Bend, being able to heal these neighborhoods that have so many vacant lots, the disinvestment, the white flight out of a lot of these neighborhoods, like to turn that around is a monumental task. And to Edward's point a second ago, is that maybe it is easier. You'll see the results faster. I do think in a sort of a slow growth town, or at least that's the way we've been, is that slow growth is not a problem. I think in some ways it can also be an advantage because it allows you to test, it allows you to take time, it allows you to show people that it's possible. And I think part of the reason that we've seen the success that I thank you guys for highlighting is that you don't see the pushback when everybody in leadership and decision makers know this is so critical for our town, not just because it's like a Sacramento where there's so many people already coming, but like we need to bring these people here. And so, I think that's our that's how we see things. But I think the things that we do can help in other ways in those fast growing places by reducing permitting times, for instance, that can help alleviate a lot of these processes that maybe not a problem in South Bend, but like that's the thing it can solve in another community like Carmel, I think it was up here, or Sacramento.
That's really well put in. I think it also underscores that a lot of places should just be doing this no matter what, in part because
the answer is the same either way.
Yeah, especially if you can bring down the purchase price, the actual sticker price. So we have a new development that's happening in the village core, and people are complaining about those luxury units, and they're like, we just need single family homes. I'm like, those single family homes in our market are twice as much, cost twice as much for anybody to acquire. So the reality is like, what is luxury is the thing we already have. What is available to someone on a lesser income is actually the thing that you're fighting in the name of housing affordability, or likes and preferences within our communities. I think that's a key part of it. And just picking up the other question that Toby had asked, how do you avoid construction of 200 plus rental apartment buildings? I'm assuming he's describing sort of tall structures or large towers, because I'm like, I would love to have 200 rental apartment buildings throughout my community. That would help. But I think the idea is 200 units in a building, the kind that provides the largest profit margins. And maybe this is one of the challenges that we do face with, approve everything versus, continue to outline where housing development should be occurring. And maybe Tim, I'm not sure if you've had, mega projects proposed for South Bend, but just while I have you here, do you want to touch on what you have done to manage height, manage sort of bulking, massing of parcels rather than distributing that throughout neighborhoods?
Yeah, I mean, look, we do want new apartment projects downtown, and we are seeing more of that happen. And so it's not a sort of one or the other; it's all of these things. Our code, especially in our urban districts, are very form-based, and so help with that bulk and massing. We don't even use FAR. To us, it's more like just a building envelope in which a building can sit, and not really overthink, how that can occur. And really, we just want to regulate the things that we think matter the most, how those buildings address the street, they fit within the height limit. And, if you can, whatever you can do within that, go for it. So, to us, we try to simplify it down to, the basics, so that it's not complicated. It's easy to use, and it delivers on the things that we know make for great streets and great neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, next week, Wednesday, we're going to pick up the question from Lonnie, the question from Sarah, and questions that come in as well from others. I want to close just with deep measure of appreciation for everybody that participated today. Can you drop a thumbs up in the chat or whatever for our panelists, and just appreciate everybody that dropped in. I know we're at the top of the hour. Really do appreciate the time that you've committed. Each one of you, members all over the world, jumping in and tackling these challenges and looking for tools and resources. A key element of your membership is creating these types of tools, resources like the Finance Decoder, Housing Ready Cities toolkits, more toolkits that are coming up in the coming months. All of that activity, all is contributed to and really spurred by your contribution. So know that you're doing a good thing, even as you sit at your keyboard or as you take a summer break or do the things that are necessary in order to keep your head in the midst of all the things that we're facing. And yet, while we do this, I hope you feel that deeper sense that we're in this together and we're beginning to make progress. And that is something that is significant in our time, certainly something that we need. So go to strongtowns.org/housing-ready. You're always welcome to come to a future session. We're also looking for folks to jump in with Edward on his focus groups that he's leading with people that are currently in the process of building accessory dwelling units or other types of housing within their communities, particularly to understand even more deeply in state after state after state and provinces what the barriers look like, as well as what many of the types of steps forward are going to resemble. This is not the last we'll touch on this, but it is. I'm glad that we had this hour together. I really appreciate the time, and keep doing what you can to build strong communities where you live.